I could still feel the bite of that crimson dust whipping across my face like 1,000 tiny knives, the kind that carved deep into your soul without drawing blood. It was a day etched in fire and grit out there in Rusty Canyon, where the land don't forgive and the people forgive even less. My name's Lena, and if you're fixing to hear a tale that'll twist your heart like a barbed wire fence, then settle in. This ain't just my story, it's the kind that echoes through the canyons, whispering about broken dreams and the stubborn spark that refuses to die. But let me take you back to that depot, where it all started unraveling like a frayed rope under a stampede. The locomotive screamed into the station like a wounded beast, sparks shooting from its iron wheels, lighting up the arid air like distant gunfire. I stepped down from that rattling car, my battered valise clutched tight in one hand, the other pressing against my chest as if to hold my heart in place. I'd traveled for weeks, crossing endless stretches of sun-baked earth, chasing a whisper of hope, a home, a husband, something solid in a world that had always seen me as too much, too tall, too strong, the Navajo for the delicate dances of white folk society. My people back home had called me a jaundice, a woman carved from the red rocks themselves. But I dreamed of a man who might see past that, who might wrap his arms around my broad shoulders and call me his. Harlan Voss was waiting there, sharp as a gambler's blade in his tailored suit, his eyes narrow under the brim of his hat. He was the one who'd written those letters, promising a life of quiet comfort in this dusty corner of Arizona. But as I approached, his gaze raked over me, my wide shoulders straining the seams of my faded calico dress, muscles honed from years of hauling water and wrestling livestock back on the reservation. His lip curled, and a bitter laugh escaped him, cutting through the crowd like a whip crack. I reckon I was getting a refined lady, he drawled, loud enough for every soul at the depot to hear. Not some mannish brute no real man could claim as a wife. The words hit me like a gut punch, shredding the fragile dreams I'd stitched together on that endless train ride. Snickers rippled through the onlookers' ranch hands with sun-leathered faces, shopkeepers in starched collars, even a cluster of wide-eyed kids pointing fingers. One little boy, no more'n 8, hollered, "Look at the monster lady. She's bigger'n Pa." Laughter erupted, sharp and cruel, and I felt my world tilt. My fist clenched around the valise handle, knuckles turning white, tears burning hot behind my eyes. But I wouldn't let him fall. Not here, not in front of these strangers who saw me as a freak, a joke. I lifted my chin, staring straight ahead, but inside, my heart was crumbling like dry clay under boot heels. Harlan didn't even spare me another glance. He spun on his polished heel and melted into the throng, leaving me standing there like a fool. I slumped onto a splintered bench, curling into myself as the dust swirled around me, carrying the echoes of their mockery. Abandoned. Just like that. No home, no husband, just the wind howling through the empty spaces where hope used to live. I thought of my mother back home, her gentle hands weaving baskets, telling me stories of strong women who bent, but never broke. But right then, I felt broken, shattered into pieces too jagged to ever fit together again. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in bloody hues and casting long, eerie shadows across the depot, I noticed him, one figure lingering in the haze, standing apart from the dispersing crowd like a lone sentinel pine on a barren ridge. Jonah Reeves, they called him, a grizzled cattleman in a frayed duster coat, his steel blue eyes hardened by decades of solitude and the unforgiving West. I'd heard whispers about him even before stepping off the train, a widower who'd lost his wife to the fever years back, now scratching out a living on a scrubby spread east of town. He wasn't the type to meddle, folks said, but something about the way he watched me, his gaze steady, without pity or scorn, stirred a flicker in my chest. He approached without fanfare, his boots crunching on the gravel, and the remaining crowd hushed like a storm cloud had rolled in. Jonah was known for his unyielding grit, a man who faced down rustlers and droughts with a quick draw and a steely nerve. I glanced up, my dark eyes narrowing like a trapped coyote, ready to snap if he dared mock me to. His voice was gravelly, low as the rumble of distant thunder. No questions. Just come along. Thou surged through me like a flash flood. Was this some trick? Another man seeing an opportunity in my desperation? My mind raced with warnings from my kin. Trust no one in these white towns, where promises turn to dust faster than rain evaporates. But when I met his gaze, all I saw was quiet resolve, like the unmoving stone of the canyons. No laughter, no judgment, just a simple offer hanging in the air. He bent down, hefted my heavy valise with one callous hand as if it weighed nothing, and strode off. Slow and sure. I hesitated, my heart pounding a war drum in my chest. Where else was I gonna go? Back to the reservation, where I'd been shunned for being too fierce, too unwomanly, or wander into the desert, letting the sun bleach my bones. After a long beat, I rose and followed, my steps tentative at first, then matching his rhythm. The trail out of town was choked with red dirt, the wind whipping sand like invisible lashes against my skin. Jonah rode his Mustang, a sturdy bay with a scarred flank, while I trudged beside, my callous feet bleeding from the sharp rocks, but my spine remained unbowed. Pride was all I had left, and I'd be damned if I let it bend. Silence reigned between us, broken only by the creak of his saddle leather and my determined footfalls, each one echoing the ache deep in my soul for belonging, for someone to see me as more than a burden. The sun set in a blaze of orange, swallowing the world in twilight, and still we pressed on. Nightfall finally brought us to his ramshackle cabin perched on the vast mesa, fences sagging like weary shoulders, the stable hushed under a blanket of stars. He swung the door wide, the hinges protesting with a groan. "Bunk, here's yours. Leave at dawn if you must, but if you stay, pull your weight like folks do." I paused at the threshold, hope clashing with fear like thunderheads culloting over the plains. This could be another trap, a lonely man's ploy. But the cabin smelled of wood smoke and solitude, not deceit. I crossed into that dim space, my first real shelter in ages, and felt a subtle shift in my fate, like the first raindrop after a drought. Dawn cracked open with the mournful howls of coyotes and gusting winds rattling the shutters. I rose from the lumpy cot, tracing the scars on my powerful arms, marks from falls, fights, and a life that had never gone easy on me. The threadbare quilt smelled of sage, a scent that tugged at memories of my grandmother's herbs, healing wounds both seen and unseen. For the first time in months, my sleep hadn't been haunted by cold dread or the gnawing hunger of uncertainty. In the lean-to kitchen, Jonah was already up, stoking the cast-iron stove with gnarled branches. Smoke curled lazy through the cracks, and without a word, he shoved a tin of stew my way before resuming his chores, sharpening a knife. With deliberate strokes, I sat at the rough-hewn table, eating in quiet, my black eyes stealing glances at this taciturn man. His face was weathered like old leather, lines etched by loss and labor, but in his movements, there was no trace of the contempt I'd grown used to. No leers, no snide remarks, just a quiet acceptance that made my chest tighten with something unfamiliar. Gratitude mixed with curiosity. The day unfolded slow, like honey dripping from a comb. Jonah headed out to tend the livestock, his silhouette fattening into the shimmering heat. Unbidden, I grabbed a rake leaning against the wall, clearing debris from the yard, mended a torn feed sack with clumsy stitches. My hands, rough and strong, weren't made for delicate work, but every motion was a silent plea. See me as useful, not useless. By midday, Jonah returned hauling buckets from the well, sweat beading on his brow. I joined him without a skin, my strength easing the load as we carried the water together. Our shared labor was wordless, but harmonious, like two rivers merging after wandering alone. Evening draped the mesa in soft purple shadows, and we found ourselves at the scarred table under the flicker of a lantern. The silence grew thick, pressing in like the night air, until I couldn't hold it back no more. "You fetched me out of pity." My voice came out steadier than I felt, but inside, my heart raced, fearing the answer. Jonah met my eyes, his steel blue gaze catching the light. "Nah," he said plainly, "just couldn't stomach him treating you like dirt." Those words stunned me, hitting deeper than any blow. After years of being seen as a burden a woman too big, too bold for anyone's comfort, no one had ever spoken to me like I was just human. A spark kindled in my chest, warm and tentative, whispering of possibilities I'd long buried, a home with walls that didn't echo loneliness, a man strong enough to stand beside me without flinching, maybe even a child to cradle in these arms that had only known toil. But hope is a fragile thing in the West, easily snuffed by the next storm. Whispers raced through Rusty Canyon faster than a prairie fire. The hulking Navajo gal had shacked up with Jonah Reeves. Some jeered in the saloons, calling him a full-gone soft. Others speculated in hushed tones at the general store, wondering if the old widower had finally cracked under the weight of his ghosts. I caught snippets where we rode in for supplies a week later. Old Mrs. Hargrove, the widow who ran the mercantile, clucking her tongue as she wrapped our flour. "That Jonah's bit off more'n he can chew," she muttered to her assistant, a scrawny kid named Billy with freckles like scattered buckshot. Billy just grinned, sneaking glances at me like I was some sideshow curiosity. But Harlan Voss, he was seething, his public embarrassment festering like an open wound. I didn't know it then, but he was already plotting in the shadows of his trading post. Enlisting Dirk slayed a notorious outlaw with fists like hammers and a trail of graves stretching from Texas to the territories. Dirk was the kind of man who made even hardened cowboys cross the street, his scarred face twisting into a perpetual snarl. A fortnight after that fateful day at the depot, Jonah and I rode into town for more supplies, flour, wire, bullets. The air was electric with stares and murmurs, folks parting like the Red Sea as we tied up at the hitching post. I strode tall beside Jonah, gripping my skirt a bit too tight, feeling the weight of their eyes on my broad frame. That's when Dirk stepped into our path, blocking the boardwalk like a fallen boulder. "That was my boss's property," he growled, his voice like grinding gravel. "Fork her over, old man." Jonah set down the sack of goods, his eyes locking on Harlan skulking behind Dirk like a coyote waiting for scraps. "She ain't nobody's," Jonah said, calm as still water. "She's with me by choice." Tension snapped like a taut wire, the street falling deathly quiet. Dirk's hand twitched toward his iron, but Jonah's draw was pure lightning, his first shot kicking up dirt at Dirk's boots. A warning growl that echoed off the buildings. The town cleared in a heartbeat, folks diving for cover as guns barked to life. Jonah ducked behind a water trough, barking orders over the din. "Lena, the wagon grabbed the scattergun." My blood surged, instincts from my warrior ancestors kicking in. I snatched the shotgun from under the seat, firing back with fierce precision. Buckshot tearing into a barrel where one of Dirk's hired guns hid. Bullets whined past, splintering wood and kicking up dust clouds. Dirk winged Jonah's arm, blood blooming dark on his sleeve, but Jonah rolled, fanning his hammer in a thunderous barrage that dropped one thug cold in the street, his body twitching in the dirt. Harlan's face twisted in panic, and he fled like the coward he was, leaving Dirk to curse and retreat into the alleys. The showdown left the town buzzing, respect edging out the scorn for Jonah's stand. As we rode back to the mesa, my hands shacking on the reins, I felt a new fire in my veins, not just survival, but something deeper. A pull toward this man who risked his life for me without hesitation. Back at the spread that night, I bandaged Jonah's wound by the firelight, my fingers gentle on his weathered skin. The flames danced in his eyes as I whispered, "I'll stay if you'll have me. Ain't leaving." He nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips, and in that moment, I felt the first threads of love weave through the cracks in my heart, tentative, but real. The West is a harsh mistress, full of shadows and surprises, but right then, under that starry sky, I dared to dream of healing, of building something from the ruins of our past. Little did I know, the real storms were just brewing on the horizon.